All right, thanks for joining. This is Sustainability Fundamentals Workshop through the USGBC-LA Green Schools program. My name is Matt Kilivris. I'm an architect with Methuen in LA, and I'll be presenting with Stuart Cooley. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm a retired professor from Santa Monica College. I used to run the Sustainable Technologies program group there, and a mechanical engineer by background.
Cool. All right. So we've got some slides to present. Second here. Okay.
And then, Matt, are you going to mention that the chat is where you should ask your questions, even though you could unmute and interrupt us? We're in the interest of time, we're trying to get through everything. And so if you have a question, feel free to pop it into the chat box. I'll try to be monitoring that. And then when I'm speaking, Matt will monitor it. So hopefully you'll get all your questions answered en route. Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
No, yeah. Thank you, Stuart. And yeah, we'll have two other people, Wayne and Stacy, presenting for the second session today. All right, so talking about sustainability and other key elements related to sustainability in the presentation throughout both sessions today. We will be touching on energy and air quality, climate change, sustainability. So what is sustainability? It's basically trying to sustain life on Earth as long as we can. It's human life, other organisms, ecologies. And so how do we do that? Or how do we do it better? So one approach is the idea of the triple bottom line. And if you think of it as a stool, you need at least 3 legs to stand on. And so if companies were to approach their business through the lens of benefiting people, the planet, and making a profit, we could get on track better, or be better suited to sustain ourselves as humans. And so that's important, looking at, as an example, the tobacco industry, as an example, who definitely made large profits in this country, but they were knowingly selling a product that was harmful to humans, also harmful to the environment through their agricultural methods. And although they didn't pay for the cost of the unhealthy, unsustainable byproducts of their business, many people paid for it in their health or other means of their health and wellness, basically. And so many lawsuits were made against the tobacco industry and won, and that's why it's less prevalent today. Also, the oil business, a lot of byproducts of transporting, mining, or securing oil, that, we see the prices at the pump, but there's more prices that we don't see, which is a lot of the pollution that is left with communities across the world who have to deal with the cleanup of some of the oil spills or messes that Exxon and companies like Chevron can avoid through their legal teams. As you can see some examples here. They've had lots and lots of lawsuits against them. So we want to see companies like this, different kind of companies, act better towards people on the planet. And so we're getting into what climate change is here. But first, there's a general consensus among the scientific community that climate change is real, and it's influenced through the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere through the burning of fossil fuels. And back in 1978, an Exxon research engineer, thought we only had 5 to 10 years before we had to start really changing our ways in terms of energy. And things have changed, not too much since 40 years ago, unfortunately. So yeah, what is climate change? Well, we know what weather is. It's the current weather. Every day we get the weather, but climate is more a study of weather patterns over longer periods of time, over a decade or century or thousands of years or millions, and seeing what those average changes are and trends in natural changes. So, but what is causing, or why do we have so many carbon emissions? Well, we had something called the Industrial Revolution in the 18th, 19th centuries, which caused us to mine a lot of natural resources, fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas, to burn for energy to produce other goods or to produce electricity that we use in our buildings and homes. And it's important to point out that these fossil fuels are from fossils of detritus, broken down organisms over millions of years that develop into these gases and oils. So they're not easily renewable. It takes millions of years for them to come about naturally. So not very sustainable. Carbon dioxide emissions have risen very drastically since the 1950s, when industrialism was really ramped up. So we can really see the levels of carbon dioxide increasing there. Definitely points to human caused climate change. We're all familiar with the term greenhouse effect, like a greenhouse for plants. We have this film atmosphere around our Earth, and right now heat gets through as it should, and then warms the Earth. The Earth radiates heat back, but because of these greenhouse gases, that energy radiating back out of the atmosphere, that would typically radiate back out of the atmosphere, is getting reflected all around the atmosphere and causing global impacts. So even though you have local pollution sources, it's affecting people across the globe throughout the atmosphere. So what role are humans playing? Well, yeah, I touched on agriculture, like the tobacco industry. We have unsustainable farming methods since the Industrial Revolution. We have industrial farming methods that were too harsh on the environment and cause things like the Dust Bowl. We release through industry, release carbon dioxide, burning fossil fuels for energy. Transportation, our cars, buses that get us around, although some of those are becoming more green and using just renewable energy and not polluting. We also have deforestation. So trees are carbon sinks. They can absorb carbon dioxide, but because we're cutting down trees faster than we're releasing carbon, that's a problem. That's clear cutting is in part of industrial logging. So why are people so upset? Well, like I said, these, even though there's local sources of pollution, we're all impacted, and it affects all of us, and it can have health impacts on people and cost impacts to improve their health because of these problems that are happening. One example locally we can relate to is wildfires happening because of drier weather here, as a result of global warming. It's become, we've had more droughts. It also impacts extreme weather with flooding. So as sea levels actually rising, as polar ice caps melt, as the Earth on average warms, and so we're going to see a lot more flooding. We've also seen more tsunamis, hurricanes happening that are causing floods. So yeah, more extreme weather. yeah, there's almost 5 million Americans who live near the coastline, and the sea level, I believe, has risen an inch at least since, I believe, the before industrialization, and it's going to rise more. So the way we design cities and buildings, we're going to have to think about that going forward. So yeah, there's two approaches to mitigating or to correcting these issues or living with them. So one way is to mitigate, try to reduce CO2 and find new ways to consume energy. Another approach is adapting to it, buildings up higher, the ground floor up higher on the coastline, so that flooding doesn't impact buildings so much, and thinking about other ways to accommodate for these changes. So we have an LA Green New Deal that's going to help with this locally. And so in terms of mitigation, we're going to start looking at reducing building energy use and encouraging transit-oriented design. So housing near transit, using 100% renewable energy, and by using and encouraging housing near transit, hopefully to reduce vehicle miles. And then also there's adaptation strategies within this New Deal. So stronger windows for higher winds, raised buildings, and raising the electrical room in the building so it's above the flood levels of the building. Planting native species. Another reason we have a lot of wildfires, I believe, is because we have a lot of non-native species in California that have died because they're not able to sustain here, and so that's caused dead firewood. Painting streets and building roofs white helps reflect more sun's energy out of the local community. There's something called heat island effect, when cities that have a lot of concrete and dark surfaces, they start to absorb energy and be warmer locally in that area, urban environment. But we can help that with painting things white as well as planting more greenery. But buildings are responsible for up to 70% of carbon emissions. So they're big consumers of energy. And yeah, of all sectors, buildings consume the most energy, about 40% more than, so a lot more than industry or transportation, which is surprising. So the way some strategies that architects and engineers use to help improve this is using more sustainable and renewable materials and environmentally friendly materials, using tighter envelopes, having better insulation, better glazing that helps control heat gain. We can also use passive systems that reduce HVAC, the energy used for HVAC, higher water efficient fixtures can reduce energy consumption. Going to LED lighting versus incandescent can be a huge energy reduction for building. And then the way we maintain buildings, are we cleaning them with toxic cleaning materials or healthy materials or healthy products, cleaning products? Do we have enough ventilation in our buildings to replace the air, so we're not getting what's called sick building syndrome? So yeah, we covered a lot here, but we're interested in what you guys think we can do to make buildings more green, or maybe I'm curious why you might think trees are so important and how to make our cities more green. So feel free to answer in the chat. Sorry about that. And I'm gonna hand it over to Stuart here, talk about energy.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So when it comes to energy, that's one of the, the big ones. It's responsible for about 40% of the carbon dioxide. He mentioned that buildings are responsible for 40% of the energy, but energy is almost in lockstep with the carbon dioxide problem. So what we're seeing here is a way that you need to look at it from a green building perspective. In the house, say your home, where you're using these energy sources, some of the energy is being burned on site, which is shown with that little CO2, because you're burning gas, natural gas, for your hot water, for your heating, for your dryer, things like that. But you also use electricity that's coming from a power plant, or in the case of California, it could be coming from wind and solar and other renewables. So California right now is getting up in terms of its percentage, somewhere on the order of 30% based on the utilities. And sorry, no, go ahead. I'll have to advance the slides, I guess, myself. Or no. Anyway, the two different types are non-renewable, which is the fossil fuel based, such as gas, coal, and oil, shown here. But also not renewable is the wind and solar. So next slide. So the problems with fossil fuels are many. Here shown a bunch of pictures that give you an idea of what it does to the land, what it does to the water. And then, of course, the combustion is the big problem right now with the CO2 that it creates. But in a moment, we'll talk about some of the other pollutants that come from combustion of fossil fuels that even in the absence of global warming would be a really strong reason to stop using non-renewable fuels. Plus the fact that non-renewable fuels will just do that, not renew, they will run out. And of course, there's environmental damage that comes from all of this. The classic picture of an oil-covered bird that was probably first noted way back in the 70s with Exxon Valdez spill. Next slide. So renewable resources are those that can virtually never be exhausted, because we're talking about sunlight. And so that sunlight's going to be consistent for we predict a few billion years. So that's not a problem in terms of running out of its supply to the earth. So that's why I personally think solar is the answer. But right now, the answers have to come from a bunch of different sources, all of the different renewals, and we'll talk about them in a minute. Next slide. So there's two different types of solar energy that we can talk about. One is photovoltaic. Practice saying that word out loud if you want. Photovoltaic means energy that comes directly from the sun in this case, and then converts directly to electricity. But going back a couple decades, we used to collect sunshine as solar thermal collectors, and we can still do that to make heat for, say, hot water in the home or heating the home indirectly through that hot water that we collect. Next slide. We also have geothermal in some cases where there's a volcano nearby, which on the Ring of Fire around the Pacific, there's lots of sources where there's availability that steam can be made directly from putting a pipe down into the ground, and that steam can be used to make energy. And that's a good source, but it's only in certain areas. But then we have the type of geothermal that can be done anywhere. This is showing a home that's tapping into the heat of the earth, which is, say, about 55 to 60 degrees if you go down about 10 feet. And you can use that heat both for heating and for cooling through the use of thermodynamic cycles, some of the magic of engineering that we have thanks to the invention of air conditioners and something called heat pumps, which you're going to probably be hearing a lot more about in the next coming years. Next slide. We also have the sources of hydropower, but to a large extent, we've already tapped those sources across the country. There are other countries where rivers can be dammed up. It does have a huge environmental effect upstream because it backs up all of the water and destroys the land, displaces people. But there is hydropower available too if there's just what we call run of river, where a small stream or river is allowed to let you run a turbine and produce a little bit of power as it comes down the hills. Next slide. Wind power is a great resource. It's vastly available across the Midwestern states. And then there's certain areas that you're probably familiar with, such as Palm Springs or Tehachapi, where there's great wind regimes. You need the wind to be a steady 15 miles per hour. So just because you have a breezy coastline doesn't necessarily mean that's the best place for wind turbines. Most of the best wind is going to be offshore, and I think California is going to start looking at that as a resource. On the East Coast, they've already started looking at offshore wind. And that's just direct wind power that comes from wind turbines from the wind blowing and converted to electricity with a generator. Next slide. If you are a business and they are sloppy, you have a lot of emissions as part of what you do, or you require a lot of power from a power plant, there is a role where you can pay money to support wind power or solar power, and that's fed to the grid, and then you get the credit for being green. And we call those renewable energy credits. So for all of those dirty industries out there, this is a way that we can indirectly have them clean up their act, so to speak. Next slide. Then these are called carbon offsets, where if you're just feeling guilty, for example, and this is something you can do with your own life, is figure out how much carbon do you put into the air through your air travel and things like that, and then pay into certified companies that will take that money and plant trees or support renewable energy ventures, and that's called carbon offsets. So there's two different ways that you can sort of clean up your act if you're a business or a person. Next slide. This is a great slide that shows you that the growth in energy use from 2005 in California, where this graph suddenly starts taking off. You can see by the colors that it's the wind, solar, and the two different solar resources shown there that are the prime reasons that we're able to meet these new energy growth needs. Geothermal and small hydro and biomass are steady but small portions. So again, solar and wind are sort of our best options in California for renewable production. Sorry, this doesn't show the non-renewable production, which is still a pretty big percentage of the whole pie. Next slide. This is a great picture of an Earth ship. If you ever get a chance when you're outside Taos, New Mexico, to check these out, there's a public center. I think that's what this is a picture of. And these are ships, not ships, these are buildings built with renewable energy at its core, and then using natural local materials, and in this case, waste materials. You can see the glass bottles used to create these walls and features that allow light into the home. And so they're using trash for a large part of what this home is being created out of. And this is just one of many ideas that are used in the green building world. And this is, very unique to the New Mexico area. Next slide. Or we can do it the way we do it around the neighborhoods here in Los Angeles, which is called a net zero energy building, or NZE. Sometimes it's called ZNE, so don't let it confuse you. It could be either way, zero net energy or net zero energy. And this home looks like just maybe any other home, but it's built with shading in mind, with thick insulation, with special systems inside that provide power renewably. And so this home doesn't produce any carbon dioxide, arguably, because it's using renewable energy for all of its needs. And so we call that an NZE building. Next slide. There's also NZE commercial buildings. The one shown here is La Cret's Innovation Center, also known as LACI for Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator. It houses an incubator for businesses that are building green things, green products. And it also, half of it is run by Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which could be your local utility if you live here in LA. And it shows a microgrid there and shows how that can work to provide power from renewable sources for commercial scale. So these are, it's another great place to visit if you get a chance. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about energy. The questions, these are usually for discussion, but I'm just going to say here, a takeaway is that what is the difference between non-renewable and renewable energy? Well, I strongly feel that renewable energy is the only way we can go to move forward if we don't want to drastically change our climate, as Matt discussed. And I think now we're going to move into air quality. Next slide. Yes, indeed. So I was arguing that the carbon dioxide problem isn't the only one, that if we didn't have climate change issues related to carbon dioxide, we would have a strong reason to stop using fossil fuels. These two pictures give you an idea of what LA is when it's fully engulfed in terrible smog. And then the picture on the right was, I think, during COVID, that just getting the cars off the road for a few days was enough to clean up the skies. And lo and behold, there's a mountain chain behind the skyline of Los Angeles. It can be sometimes weeks to months before you live in Los Angeles and realize that there's a mountain range back there. Next slide. So this is a rather busy slide that shows you all of the different species of chemicals that are a problem. We call them criteria pollutants, or down there where it says common gas pollutants. Ozone is one, which is good when it's in the stratosphere, but it's a pollution at the level that we breathe. Carbon monoxide coming out of unburned hydrocarbons in cars or poor combustion can create that pollutant. And then sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxides, collectively known as SOx or NOx. You'll sometimes see those terms. And those are pollutants that create acid rain. And they are also directly related to photochemical smog, which is what created that awful picture that we started this section off in. On the right side, we're seeing VOCs. Those are volatile organic compounds. Those are the smelly things that are released at gas stations, can be released in complete combustion. And there's a whole lot, 187 toxic compounds that we track in the green building world to make sure that we are building in a way that doesn't affect the air quality that you're breathing, since you spend a lot of your time indoors. Next slide. Health effects of outdoor air pollution are many. This just gives you, obviously you're familiar with asthma problems and just irritated eyes from going through polluted areas. But there are long-term things like emphysema, that and things that start at birth that can have adverse health effects throughout your life. Lead, for example, is one. Mercury in the air is another. So these are all things that are hugely important to us, and we're doing the wrong thing by burning fossil fuels. Next slide. So photochemical smog, as I mentioned, it's a soup that's basically nitrogen dioxide mixed with sunlight, mixed with unburned hydrocarbons from gas combustion. And when the three accumulate, that sunlight that's so great at making renewable energy is also good at stirring chemical reactions that create some really nasty chemicals. And we call that smog, and it's terrible to breathe. And there's, again, strong reasons not to be burning these fuels. Next slide. The hope for, and green building is pushing this in a big way, is what we call building electrification. We'd also like to electrify the vehicles. If we can make all of our combustion burning power plants convert over to uses of electricity that are produced renewably, therein lies the hope for getting away from some of these long-term climatic effects. So we'll see these words electrification and decarbonization quite a bit in the literature, and that's all the talk these days. And you're going to be hearing more about it with this administration moving forward, with the green jobs that we can talk about later this afternoon. They're going to talk about it in the second session. So these are all good news for you as someone interested in this field. Next slide. So green buildings, what they do is they build buildings that avoid the sources of indoor pollution, because things as benign as what you would think might not be a problem, but furniture, for example, made with particle board is off-gassing into your home, producing these volatile organic compounds that you're breathing that have these health effects. So green building is looking at the health effects of things inside, not just things happening outside. And that's almost, if not more important, to what's going to happen to you in your future. Next slide. There are simple steps you can take from just cleaning more often, using non-toxic cleaning products, because that's one of the big problems we have is we've chosen to put some toxic chemicals in our cleaning because toxics tend to kill things. Unfortunately, they have the adverse effect of possibly killing you. So you need to choose your cleaning products carefully. And we work with groups like Green Janitors Program to make sure that buildings are using these non-toxic products. Also replacing and managing your filters and doing basically maintenance around the home. And then using windows to increase airflow, something we call natural ventilation, is important as well. All of these things help with indoor air quality. Next slide. There are different organizations that put a seal or a certification on these different products. So don't just go out there and buy something that says green, because green doesn't necessarily mean anything. But if it's certified through one of these companies like UL or Green Seal or CRI Plus in the case of carpets, or Green Guard, these are all certified businesses that are vetted so that you know that when you see this seal, they've done their homework and they're improving the air quality in everything you use inside. Next slide. So the reflection questions on this section are how has air quality changed since COVID-19? And I mentioned that you saw that in the first slide, it's improved it. Maybe you can answer the question, what can we do to make indoor air quality better? And this is a good time to use the chat box if you want to take a stab at it. I can see your answers. What particles in the air cause air pollution? We all know about carbon dioxide because that's the greenhouse gas. But did you pick up what some of those other pollution criteria pollutants are? And then in LA, what is the biggest air polluter? And I think the answer they're looking for there is cars. All of these are things that we can improve our air quality with. So automobiles and transportation is a big problem. That's not usually covered with green building, but in fact, green buildings are where these electric vehicle car chargers are. So now you do see green buildings being created with an eye to getting people off the road, limiting parking, or in trying to, what's the word? Inspire people to use carpools or other modes of transportation that aren't polluting. So all of these things are reflection questions. So I went through that pretty quickly, and I'm amazed that we have a few extra minutes now for questions. And so I hope we can open it up. It's a small group. Feel free to ask any questions you want. Water is going to be covered this afternoon, so I don't want to step on the toes of those that are presenting this afternoon. Do we have any questions? Anything at all? I know we went through that rather quickly. I don't want to scare people off. We can go back and cover some other slides, or if you'd want to see another slide for a longer period of time, we can check back on those. Don't be shy, guys. It's a small group, I know, but nothing to lose.
I've got a thought.
Sure, Bessie.
Our nonprofit Pendopopolis is just starting to work with high school students in saving water and power, and we're working with the LADWP on that. As a former professor, I'm wondering if you have any handy tips for us on the best way to engage kids of that age. I know you were in college, but we're trying to figure out how to make them so riveted and so fascinated by this whole thing that they're going to be working on these water and power saving projects in their homes and also in their neighborhoods, reaching out to inspire them to do that.
Well, I can look back to my childhood. I was inspired with transportation. I was always confused about cars, why they had to be so big and so heavy, because cars require gasoline. gasoline is a very high density fuel, which is great stuff, but it's non-renewable. So we needed to find an alternative to it. And it took, my whole lifetime. For now, I can drive an electric car. Even a hybrid car took, a few decades before it appeared on the streets. So I think that if you're a young person today and you're looking for something to get into, alternative transportation that's going to be lighter and not require as much infrastructure is going to be the name of the game. I think everyone loves convenience. So, and when I think about cars, I think about needing more room on the road. And one way we can do that is by making our cars narrower. Think about how many people sit in a car that's twice as wide as it needs to be. That's one of the big pushes that I felt was going to happen. And you see it on occasion with, there's a company called Lit Motors that's building basically a motorcycle type device, but it's really a car because it doesn't tip over. Anyway, that's just one thing that I find fascinating. And there's lots of other companies out there that are doing some really advanced thinking in terms of what our future can be. Of course, we talked about, or you're familiar with, autonomous vehicles. That's something that's grabbing a lot of attention, but that's the transportation world. In the green building world, anything that uses energy in the home is being thought about again, with alternatives coming out every day. So the need for invention in this sector is huge. And that's what I would think students would be gravitating towards today. Anything that you find inconvenient at home or troubling or expensive can probably be improved. So, and for the rest of the room, Betsy is with a group called Pando Populus, which has been doing a lot of great work for a long time. And the Pando Populus, if you look it up, is maybe I don't want to speak for you, Betsy, but it's a special plant, right? That grows as a collective group, basically. And
an aspen grove.
Mm-hmm. So every tree is interconnected, right? Interconnected is the word. That's one of the themes of our conference these past 2 days. So yeah, it's a great metaphor for thinking about systems and how things work in the environment.
It's very interesting. The Pando Grove actually is in Utah, and it's 100 acres or so. And so the DNA from this tree over here is the same as the DNA way over on the other side. So it was
Right.
just,
So
as you say, a good symbol that we're all the same.
It's arguably one of the largest living entities around, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
With the same DNA. It's
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. Yeah, plants, and that's a huge field that the green building world needs to cover a little bit better, because plants in the living environment are important to air quality and to peace of mind. And so even if you're interested in biology and or just plants in general, if you're a farmer at heart, there's going to be a future for understanding how plants interact with people in the urban and built environments. And so that's another thing. You see these pictures of plants growing on outsides of buildings. I think you're going to see more things along those lines.
Yeah, I agree with Stuart. Students should find a problem that interests them, and then try to figure out a way to make it better.
It's a really good point. And we have our share of problems out there.
Yeah, we haven't solved them all yet.
And be that voice. I mean, Matt started this whole thing with that picture of a guy in 1978 working for an oil firm and saying that, this is a problem. In 5 or 10 years, if we don't change our ways, we're going to be in big trouble. And we are in big trouble. And there's no joke about it at this point. It's critical. We talked about mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is taking care of the problem. Adaptation is learning to live with it. And unfortunately, we're moving much more to the second, which is just having to adapt to all of these changes that we've created in our environment. It is a challenge for sure. Other questions? or if anyone wants to introduce themselves, I'm curious who's out there. Maxwell, if you don't mind, maybe unmuting and just telling us, are you a student? Are you just interested? What your background is?
Yeah, hi.
Hi,
I'm a
Well-
another student, yeah.
just interested? What got you interested?
Well, I want to go into the field of marine biology, and I'm gonna try and figure out how to stop climate change, if that's even possible.
That's great. I mean, bold answers, and I think marine biology is the right place to do it because the oceans have basically saved our bacon up to now. It's taking up a lot of the carbon dioxide that we put into the air. Unfortunately, it has its limits in terms of how much carbon dioxide it can take before we start affecting marine life. And obviously we already have. So that's a great area to be into. So great choice. Is it Kevin who's also on? Do you and or Noel?
Hey, good
Go
morning.
ahead. Go ahead, Kevin.
Morning.
Yeah, I'm a youth advocate, and also I'm currently working for a company that is involved in indoor air quality solutions. So I'm always looking to find out who's out there thinking of the right strategies and wanting to move our planet in a better direction, one step at a time. So happy to be here and learn from you all.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
And Noel?
Good morning. Yeah, I'm here actually for my daughter. She can be in this session. She's going to try to be until 11 a.m. But she's interested in the green schools and maybe having something at her school. So related to the Earth Day or something related to the sustainability. I've been around this for a while. I'm an architect and I do affordable housing, green buildings. So I've been talking to her about it, and I thought this would be a great opportunity for her. But unfortunately, she's not available right now, but hoping that she could join the discussion that's happening at 11.
Well, we repeat this quite often, and you can have your school request, I believe, another separate session at their school. So yeah, feel free to follow up with this. This is not a one-off presentation. We've been presenting this basically the same slide deck for a few months now, and we constantly modify it as needed. And Janina, I believe, just walked into the room, but if she wants to introduce herself. No? Okay.
Yeah, also this is being recorded, as you saw in the chat. So
Yeah, it might be available through YouTube or some of the other Whova channels that invited, that's hosting us in the protocols today. So you might be able to get a repeat of this available online. Are we at time or do we have 3 more minutes? I think Fernanda, is she there?
Yeah, sorry, Stuart. Yeah, you have 3 more minutes.
Oh, okay.
Let's open for more questions.
Well, I didn't mean to rush through it that quickly. I didn't realize. As I said, I think this. I think they took away some of our slides because we found that we were crowding too much in. As I said, we're constantly changing this. Problems keep propping up and solutions keep appearing. So we are constantly making changes to our deck. But obviously, this is a very rich field. It's not something that can be covered in an hour or two. This is just a smattering to get you interested and to understand some of the key phrases, such as words like mitigation, adaptation, acronyms like USGBC and NZE, if you remember what NZE was, net zero energy. Anyway, thanks for having us. Thank you, Noel, for your comment in the chat box. We are here to answer questions. Feel free to contact USGBC. There's many avenues to get involved. USGBC has basically taken over the Municipal Green Building Conference and Expo that used to be hosted at the gas company building. I don't know where it will be held in the future once we go back to non-virtual, but it's has been for 20 years now a great way to learn and get up to speed on all things related to sustainability and the urban environment, especially in Southern California.
All right. Yes. Thank you all for joining. And yeah, please reach out with any questions. All right.
All right, thank you. We
With
can
that-
stay on for a few minutes,
Sure.
but feel free to, to drop off. I think we're all done.
Thanks, you guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Okay.
Betsy.
Thank you. Bye.